So there are kind of two different types of fun interview for this. One is somebody that I would already have known because I'd interviewed them before or knew them personally or whatever. So like an Albert Hammond Jr. was a really fun interview for this book because he's so gracious and personable and willing to talk about the dirt and the, you know, the glory and the tragedy of being in a rock band in New York City in the early 2000s. He was really fun. And then the second type is maybe someone who I didn't know and hadn't interviewed before, and so they have a bunch of stories that I'd never heard before, like James Murphy, who I didn't know at all, and is also quite obviously quite a character. So interviewing him was also kind of a surprise in a way that makes for a lot of enjoyment. There's no such thing as a least fun interview, obviously. They're all amazing. No, I would say all the interviews for the book were fun. Some were more stressful than others because you like worked really hard to get somebody. So I was really nervous before I interviewed Julian because he is incredibly smart and incredibly guarded, and that blend makes for a lot of anxiety for us journalistic types who are just like, oh my God, please A, don't hate me, and B, say something interesting that I can use. And I think we did okay in the end. I think we did okay. Oh my God, writing an oral history is like 100% awkward moments because you have to kind of, you show up to these interviews having promised these rock stars that you're not going to torture them because all they have to do is like talk for a little while about New York City. It's not like a real interview. It's just a sort of chat between pseudo friends. And then there's always something that someone else has said that you have to broach with them. And that's where things get sort of uncomfortable. It's like, great, it's so great talking to you about your favorite pinball machines in 2002 at whatever bar. And one more quick thing, here's what your bandmate really thinks about you. So there were some awkward moments, but that's what vodka's for. There were a lot of really interesting interview locations for this. I mean, standard like tour bus, like weird, sad bar, people's houses, but the one that comes to mind is having interviewed Ryan Adams on the phone, but he was supposed to give me 20 minutes and then he gave me 3 hours. And I was at my house in upstate New York on the lawn with my dogs because I thought I was just gonna kind of hang out there for a second, do this quick interview that I'd been trying to get for a really long time, but it went on and on and on. So it was like, oh my God, I have to get the dogs inside and I have to like feed them dinner and I have to like, you know, get something to drink and I have to like run the rest of my day without ruining Ryan's flow, and it's sort of in a stealth way. So I think the most challenging interview location was a random lawn in upstate New York with Ryan Adams on the other end of the phone, like as I try and plug my charger in so it doesn't die while he's talking and changing batteries and like all under the cover of trying not to disrupt him. This is probably the first interview I've done actually in a bathroom for this book, although I would say that there were a couple where there were a lot of trips to the bathroom because there was a lot of drinking in bars and tape recording over like loud stereo systems, and you know, the more you drink, the more you have to pee, the more bathroom visits there are, but I let the rock stars go to the bathroom on their own, which was very big of me, I think. There is no way I could pick my favorite quote from the book. It's sort of, they still haunt me. I have a kind of like recurring series of ticker tape like words going through my dreams of things where I'm like, did that even make it in? One of my favorites that isn't in the book is when I interviewed James Murphy, I was trying to kind of broach the subject of Brooklyn as this brand that had kind of taken over the world, and artisanal this and trucker hats and handmade pickles or homemade pickles or whatever, and I was kind of easing my way into it, and he just goes, oh yeah, that's our fault. And I was like, oh, good. I guess I don't have to ease my way into this part of this conversation. So that's one of my favorite quotes that's not in the book. There were so many surprises reporting this. I think among the most kind of striking was just the general emotional availability of all these dudes in bands. Like, I really didn't think that they would kind of show up for the more sort of intimate, vulnerable, how it felt to be me in these moments, parts of the conversations that I wanted to have, but they really did, which I think should give us all hope for men and for rock boys around the world. There is so much dirt that isn't in the book that kind of ended up on the cutting room floor for this. It's funny because people keep telling me how gossipy it is, and I'm like, yeah, if you only knew what isn't in there. So I feel, yeah, the outtakes for this project could fill a whole second book of just sheer cattiness, and I tried to steer clear of that when actually writing it. Like, if something made it in the book, it wasn't just because it was a dirty story or a kind of sexy story or like a salacious detail. It had to have something important, some important relevance to the actual narrative at hand. But that having been said, yeah, there's a lot of dirt on the floor for Meet Me in the Bathroom. So my Meet Me in the Bathroom soundtrack is ever changing, but what's always on it is Yeah Yeah Yeahs and Fever to Tell songs specifically. I mean, Karen O was my rock star during this period of time. I knew the Strokes guys, I knew the Interpol stuff really early on, but there was something really rad about just having this woman on stage on par with these guys, and they were all worshipful of her. I mean, she was the sort of hands down biggest, baddest, wildest character in this entire scene, and the fact that she happened to be female was really inspiring and kind of gave me confidence to forge my own path in this world. So my girl, my album, my Meet Me in the Bathroom soundtrack is Yeah Yeah Yeahs all the way. My personal favorite memory of that time shifts. There's so many shows, there's so many great moments, but I do often think about this one time when I came up to New York from Philadelphia, where I was in school, to see my friend Nick Valenci. He had a rehearsal that week or something. I mean, I wasn't even there to see him, but like, he was in town and I was in town, and we met for dinner, and somewhere in the West Village, and I didn't understand where I was even. It was when New York was still a total mystery to me in terms of like the landscape. And afterwards, his friend Julian, who I'd never met before, came to pick us up to drive us across town in this car called Steven has a strong presence in the book. And it was just like the most illegal situation ever. Like, Steven had no license plate, and like was kind of parts of Steven were falling off. And it was just sort of one of those moments where you're like, wow, my mom would really like me to not get in this car right now, and I am absolutely getting in, and like, I don't know really where this is gonna take me, but off we go. And I mean, they were just running around the Lower East Side in that thing until it probably broke down somewhere, but they dropped me off across town at my grandparents' house where I stayed. But I think about the kind of feeling of freedom of that. Those guys had such a kind of gang mentality and sense of sort of playing the city like a video game, as I write in the introduction for the book. It was like, anything's possible, any moment can lead to any other moment, can lead to any other moment, and all of them will be magical. And that's what it felt like to kind of roll around the Lower East Side in 2000 and Steven with Nick and Julian. It's impossible to pick a best show for this period. Contenders include the Strokes at Hammerstein Ballroom, the Halloween show right after 9/11. It was, I came up from Philadelphia to see it. I was still in college, and they had started to take over the world, and it was just completely mind-boggling because, you know, we knew them. It was like, I don't know, it was like if your brother becomes a rock star or something. It was just completely beyond comprehension. And it was almost like, I remember being on the train with my friend Nikki to come to the city and thinking like, but will they really be there? Like, I know it says that they're playing Hammerstein Ballroom, but like, nah, you know. And then I remember walking up from Penn Station from the train and like grabbing a slice of pizza on the way, classic college kid, like that's all I ate that day probably, and kind of rolling up and being on the list for the first time, and going into Hammerstein and seeing the Moldy Peaches, who were just unbelievable. I had no idea what that was, and it was the first time I saw them. And then the Strokes came out, and God, like there they were, like on a stage, like grown-up rock stars or something, doing things like playing guitar for other people who were there to pay money to see them. It was just, and then it was this incredible legendary show. So that one stands out.